Okay, so now next question is, when will we help? All right, we don't always help. When will we help? Okay, so Latane and Dabbs, Biblatane, I always like that name, Biblatane. So what they did was they went to 1,430 different cities, 145 people dropping objects, usually pencils or something crazy like that, in elevators in front of them. Who helps pick up? And what they found was as the number of people in the elevator increased, the amount of help that they received decreased. And they called this diffusion of responsibility. Okay? Diffusion of responsibility has been a major explanation for the Kitty Genovese issue. The more people around, the less likely, because the responsibility for helping is spread out and diffused across many, many people. Well, helping is in a more straightforward way. The bystander effect is that people are less likely to help when there are other bystanders or others present. And so, in a really classic study, the smoke filled room experiment, what they did was they had people come into a study and they had clipboards and they're gonna, and then all of a sudden on a door on the side over there, like a closet or something, it's not the main door to the room, so some other side door. And smoke starts coming out from underneath the doorway, okay? And they're either in the room filling out the clipboard by themselves, under my face is the other, which is the purple line up there, or they're in groups of three or more, or no, three-person groups. They did a lot of versions of that. This is the versions they're telling us here. And you see what we got here, time from the start of the smoke until people, and so all of a sudden the smoke is coming in for 1 minute, and if you're alone, it's about 40% of the time you're going to go report the smoke. The smoke is coming in for 2 minutes, it's about a 60% chance. Smoke is coming in for 3 minutes, it's a 70% chance, which is pretty much, but it's kind of scary that 30% of people just sat there and just ignored the smoke coming into the room, okay? But in this, when you have three people groups, look at that. Smoke is coming in for 4 minutes, and people like 10%, only 10% report that smoke's coming in. And it increases slightly with time, but not very much. And I've seen the videos from this, and it's an amazing thing because what happens is that you can see people that they're they've been socialized. When you're in a room filling out papers, you kind of keep your eyes on your work here. And so you can see them sort of glancing out of the corner of their eye, and they see the smoke. But here's what's going on. One of the most important problems is interpretation. So is it an emergency? Is it something that needs to be? And so what they're doing is they're going to judge, they're going to answer that question, is this an emergency, based on, are the other people around me responding as though it's an emergency? Because if the guy on my left isn't freaking out and panicking, and the guy on my right isn't freaking out and panicking, maybe it's not an emergency. But of course, the guy on your left and the guy on your right are looking at you, right? Looking at you to interpret whether or not it's an emergency. So interpretation is a key factor, and when other people are around, often we get into this notion where we look at each other. Helping can be affected by where it occurs, where helping is necessary. And so here was that silly pencil idea, or magazines, pens, whatever. And look at that, limping with an injured leg, or pretending they're blind, something, etc. And so the question is, who's going to help in these various situations? And I can't hardly read this tiny little print on my screen here, but look, they did it in Rio de Janeiro, they did it in Vienna, Austria, all the way down, and so Kuala Lumpur in New York in the United States. And it's like, apparently New Yorkers are all right helping a blind person, but if your leg is broken, you're out of luck, okay? Good luck with that. And so you find that when it comes to helpfulness, if you need help, make sure you're in Rio de Janeiro. As long as they don't rob you first. Yeah, whatever. So different parts of the world are more likely to be helpful than in other parts of the world, with New York, not surprisingly, coming in quite low, and Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, being at the bottom. Well, it turns out that, we had talked about how some people, when you witness aggression, you can perhaps become more aggressive, but it works the same way with helping behaviors. In fact, this is one of the main reasons that Sesame Street was created, was to demonstrate pro-social behaviors on a television setting that children could relate to, and once they've seen the pro-social behaviors being demonstrated, they'll be, in theory, more likely to imitate and repeat the pro-social behaviors. So anyway, just like the observation of aggression, helpfulness can too. So an LA driver is more likely to stop and help a woman fixing a flat tire if there was another person a quarter mile back that had just been, if they had just witnessed a helping flat tire, etc. Or New Jersey Christmas shoppers are more likely to drop money into a Salvation Army bucket if the person that there's walking in front of them has done so first. Okay? So, an interesting thing. Is it that I would suspect that if you observe helping behavior and then it comes time for you to exhibit helping behavior and you do not, I suspect that a giant guilt feeling arises and we help to avoid the guilt, all right? I don't know, it could be mine. And another classic study, what they did was the Good Samaritan study. It took seminary students. I'm going to tell you a secret. I mean, my thoughts are, I understand, pastors, reverends, seminary students, etc. They're human. I got that. But somehow they're supposed to be better than I am. I don't know. It's somehow they're supposed to be better than me. So, whatever. Here we go. A little bit of concern here. So what we found is seminary students were said, okay, you're going to be going and you're going to be giving us a sermon on the Good Samaritan, right? The Good Samaritan, the person in Samaria that helps Jesus, so the Good Samaritan, or some other completely unrelated topic. And so now they're supposed to be talking about the Good Samaritan or completely other different sermon. So you'd have to think, as they're getting this Good Samaritan sermon thought into their minds, that helping ought to be front and center, right? It ought to be at the top of their heads. So half of the students then were told, okay, oh, you got to go, you got to hurry, go, 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 go. And half of them were like, don't worry about it, it's like an hour, you got an hour to get there, just, walk away. And so in the pathway, in order to get to the building where they're supposed to give the sermon, there's somebody, collapsed on the sidewalk and quite obviously needs help. Okay? And so what happened was it didn't matter if they were supposed to be talking about the Good Samaritan or some other sermon. If they were told, oh, you got to hurry, they would just like step over the top of the person that was collapsed on the sidewalk and just right past and just go on. But it didn't matter which sermon they were asked to give, I mean, Good Samaritan or otherwise, if they were not in a hurry, they tended to stop and help. And so it's pretty straightforward that this time pressure is a really, really big part of it. Similarity is also an interesting thing. And I mean, this is obviously related to the genetic relatedness stuff from the vervet monkeys, because the more physically similar somebody is to you, the more genetic material they share in common with you. And I mean, that's just a, genetics 101. And so here was a fascinating study where let's try to get this right. So they have Manchester, British football, yeah. But the Manchester United and the Liverpoolians. I made that up. Okay, so what happens is there's a person collapses after, I think it was in the parking lot. After the game is over, there's somebody collapsed on the ground, on the left side graph. There's somebody collapsed on the ground. They're wearing either a Manchester United shirt or a Liverpool shirt. And it's like, who's going to help the guy, right? And if they collapsed with Manchester United jersey on, people help them in the Manchester parking lot. It was like, that's just terrible. Are you serious? I mean, I understand having a team a lot. I love my Green Bay Packers, and I like to, badmouth on the Cowboys fans. But it's not like I would dehumanize them as this. It's just like good-natured fun, right? But no, apparently not, okay? And so the graph on the right, my brain always gets twisted when I try to understand it, but it's the same basic effect in the opposite parking lot. And so in the same way, what they did was they created a strange combination of pictures. And so they took essentially the participant's face and they merged it up and made it, they made a new image. And all of a sudden, this composite image, the participant, the composite image, which was created from their own face, then the participants were like, I'm willing to help this person more. Okay? And so it's really an interesting thing. So to bring it all together, Latane and Darley came up with this decision tree. And it really helps us to understand the Kitty Genovese problem. Okay? So here's what happens. Number one, you have to notice the incident. So if there was 37 people that witnessed this event, clearly there was 100 people that slept right through it. It was 3 o'clock in the morning. Okay? When it's 3 in the morning, I'm not waking up for nothing. And so, you know what? If you don't even notice, then guess what? You go towards the bottom arrow there and you don't help. Okay? Now, if you notice the incident, yes, move up. Now, we have to say, is it an emergency? Interpretation is everything. And again, part of the problem with the interpretation is that in the act of interpretation, one of the most important pieces of information, like in that smoke-filled study example, is what are the people around me doing? Okay? Are they panicking? Because if the people around me are panicking, then clearly this is an emergency. Well, it's partly that, partly, say, for example, it's 3 a.m. and it's Queens, New York, and somebody yells, oh, he's killing me. What does that really mean, right? Is this like a prostitute fighting with a pimp? Is this, a boyfriend and a girlfriend? Does he's killing me really mean he's killing me? And so I can imagine a whole lot of people, even if they're watching this event, they're 5 stories up or something. I can imagine a whole lot of them not interpreting this as an emergency. So now let's say you do interpret it as an emergency. Move up. Now, do you assume responsibility? And this is an important thing because, again, these people are looking out their windows at each other, and one person is like, man, she needs some help. But look, Mrs. Smith over there, she's a nurse. She's way more qualified than I am to give any kind of help. So it's not me that needs to be responsible, right? Because Mrs. Smith is a nurse. Meanwhile, Mrs. Smith is going, that dude has got a big knife. I mean, are you kidding me? This is dangerous. Look at Mr. Johnson over there. I know he works out at the gym on a regular basis. He is a tough guy, right? And so all of a sudden, everybody could be just saying somebody else is more qualified than I am. And so unless somebody goes all the way up the yes arrows, there will not even be an attempt to help, okay? And this is a pretty powerful problem. So we need to notice the event, right? We need to interpret it as an emergency. That is not correct. Then we need to take responsibility. And this is actually a pretty powerful one that apparently now in CPR training, what happens is that when people need, medical treatment, that this situation happens. Is it an emergency? Should I do something? What should happen? What should I do? And so people trained in CPR are taught, to point out people and say, you go and dial 911. You go and get me, I don't know, a wet towel. I don't have no idea. All right, I don't do CPR. I'm sorry. I should. I'm a bad person. So somebody should designate responsibilities, okay? So in a very, very cool study, the radio on a blanket study, they did this thing where they had people, it was on a beach, and they had a radio, and they were playing obnoxiously loud music, clearly annoying everybody around them, okay? And then what happens is that at one point, they just, the people with the annoying radio, they just walk away, right, and leave their stuff there. And a couple minutes after they walk away, somebody comes along and just kind of walks down the beach and just sort of picks up the radio and just keeps on walking, okay? Interesting. And when that's the case, pretty much nobody around is going to say anything. Nobody says anything, nobody does anything. But how about this? Same scenario, they're playing the radio really obnoxious, annoying everybody. Then, just before they leave, they say to somebody next to them, "Hey, can you watch my radio?" Okay? And then they walk off. And all of a sudden now, that person comes along the beach and just picks up the radio and starts to walk off. And then all of a sudden, boom, people spring into action. All right, they spring into action and they'll like tackle the guy, and that's not your radio and the whole thing. And so all of a sudden, simply saying, "Can you watch my radio?" was enough to trigger the helping behavior because it helped in the interpretation and the assumes responsibility portion. Okay? All right, so I'll stop at that one for this section of our material and pick up again in a few minutes.